Bueno, los invito por favor a tomar sus asientos. Welcome, and I would like to invite to take your seats so we can begin.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sale de ahí todo el grupo. Okay. Only to the distinguished panelists and Mr. Minister and Mr. Deputy Secretary General, we're going to stand up for 1 minute, have an official picture, and then we begin. Only us. Muy bien. Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon.
Second World Summit for Social Development, enhancing global efforts to achieve the 2030 agenda. Special welcome to CEPAL or ECLAC in Santiago, to Mrs. Amina Mohamed, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations. It is an honor to have you with us this afternoon. As you know, this event is organized jointly by the ILO and ECLAC. ECLAC in our role as coordinators of this year of the Regional Economic Commissions. A warm welcome to Mr. Gilbert Wombo, Director General of the International Labour Organization. Also, special word of thanks and warm welcome to all the heads of agencies present this afternoon who are in Chile on occasion of the meeting of the Chief Executive's Board of Coordination, CEB, of the United Nations. And to the Minister of Foreign Relations of Chile, Mr. Alberto Van Claveren. Thank you, sir, for being with us. Many thanks indeed to the representatives of UN commissions, agencies, funds, programs, and country teams who have joined us, as well as ambassadors in Chile, government officials, members of academia, the private sector, and civil society. And to all of you connected virtually. Having finished these comments of warm greetings to all, we will start the session of opening remarks. This session will have the participation of Mr. Gilbert Wombo, Director General of the International Labour Organization and co-organizer of this event, of the Minister of Foreign Relations in Chile, Mr. Alberto Van Claveren, and myself, as the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. Each one of us will have 5 minutes. And I would like very much to salute the President of the ECOSOC, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Chile to the United Nations. Thank you very much for being here. And I will salute more personally each one of the members of the panel as we initiate the next panel. So I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Gilbert Wombo, Director General of the ILO.
Thank you so much, Jose Manuel, and good afternoon to all of you. As a co-organizer, I wouldn't add more than what my dear colleague Jose Manuel has said. And for us, it's quite important to really pay a special, express a special gratitude to both the Deputy Secretary General, Amina, for coming here, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the President of ECOSOC, and also recognize here the Juan Somavia, my predecessor, and with so the fact that we have a lot of colleagues, not only from the academia and other institutions, but also from the system, we really also want to welcome the former president of this country and very well known in our whole UN family, President Bachelet. We really appreciate your presence here. For us, the whole point of the question is why do we need to have this this opportunity to discuss when we all are focusing on materializing the summit of the future on that, and are we jumping already to the 2025 second global summit? But for us, this summit of the second social summit for sustainable development is going to be the first one after the summit of the future that is really going to set up the way forward on that. So this is what using the opportunity about the CEB happening here in Santiago de Chile, we, Jose Manuel, discussed that, okay, let's not miss the opportunity to have this exchange amongst ourselves. So I'm sure we'll have time to really have initial discussion at the time that we know the co-facilitators, Belgium and Morocco, are working on the modality resolution. With that, let me thank all of you again for turnout this afternoon. Thanks. Back to you, Jose.
Thank you very much, Mr. Juanbo. I'd like to also recognize that we have with us in the room Madame Bachelet, Michelle Bachelet, former president of Chile. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. And now I have the pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Alberto Van Claveren, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Chile.
Thank you very much. Madam Deputy Secretary of the United Nations, Amina Mohamed, Mr. Director General of the ILO, Gilbert Humbo, Mr. Director General of the FAO, Q Dong-yu, Executive Secretary of ECLAC, and our host this afternoon, Jose Manuel Salazar, Madam Executive Director of UN Women, Sima Babus, Mr. Administration of the UNDP Program, Achim Steiner, Madam Ambassador of Chile to the UN and President of the ECOSOC, Paula Narváez, Ambassador Juan Somavia, former President Michelle Bachelet, Minister of Social Affairs of Chile, Javier Altoro, Senator Jose Miguel Insulza, Chair of the Committee on Foreign Relations of our Senate, distinguished guests, friends. On behalf of the government of Chile, it is my distinct pleasure to extend a warm welcome to all of you gathered here today. We are deeply honored to host so many high representatives from the United Nations for the first time in Chile, particularly on the occasion of the first regular session of the Chief Executive Boards for Coordination, CEP, scheduled for later this week. This meeting will also coincide with the 31st World Press Freedom Day Conference, an event we have organized in partnership with UNESCO. This conference underscores the critical importance of journalism and freedom of expression, especially amidst the current global environmental crisis. These topics are of the utmost relevance in the collective efforts that the international community, our nations, and our societies are making to advance towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. We have gathered here today to look at the significant strides made over the past decades in eradicating poverty, reducing inequality, and promoting social inclusion. From this reflection, we must envision how to move forward and face new challenges to achieving inclusive social development in the context of multiple ongoing global crises. In his report on the progress of the SDG Goals 2023, the Secretary General of the United Nations highlights a disturbing reality. I quote, "Halfway through the time frame for the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, we are leaving more than half the world behind. End of quote. Persistent inequalities, economic insecurity, increasing impacts of climate change, escalating conflicts, and an expanding digital divide are obstacles threatening our goal of achieving prosperity for all. Chile is strongly committed to working towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and supporting multilateral efforts oriented to that purpose. As a country, we have made significant strides towards advancing our transition to greener energies and means of production. We have championed initiatives that foster gender equality through our feminist foreign policy and other public policies, the protection of the environment and the seas through our turquoise foreign policy, as well as taking an active role in the international fora we are part of. As a country, we maintain a long-standing commitment to the significance of multilateralism as a fundamental component for global peace and prosperity. This stance has garnered recognition from the international community, evident in Chile's leadership roles within various UN bodies. For instance, Chile currently holds the presidency of ECOSOC for the term 2023-2024 and participates as a member in the UN Human Rights Council. Additionally, President Boric has been entrusted with the co-chairmanship of the High-Level Steering Committee for SDG 4, alongside the Director General of UNESCO, reflecting Chile's dedication to advancing sustainable development goals on a global scale. Chile sees the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development as pivotal to confronting these complex global challenges and crises. This comprehensive plan of action for people, the planet, and prosperity holds the potential to transform our world by placing inclusive social development at its core. However, if we want to leave no one behind, we must reinforce our global commitment to multilateral and cooperative actions. In this, I applaud that this seminar explores key topics and issues relevant to the upcoming Second World Summit for Social Development. I am sure that this discussion will take place today, will positively affect the outcomes of this summit in 2025, which holds the potential to update the Copenhagen Declaration, covering critical issues such as universal social protection, adequate housing, education, employment, and the SDGs. In closing, I wish to acknowledge the work of Ambassador Juan Somavia in organizing this event. All his life, he has been deeply committed to fostering a better, more equitable and inclusive world, as evidenced by his remarkable credentials. Ambassador Somavia played a pivotal role in the inaugural World Summit for Social Development in 1995, and it is heartening to witness his enduring dedication to the principles and commitments established in Copenhagen, even after 3 decades. Finally, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all participants for your efforts to advance the cause of inclusive development. Together, let us seize this opportunity to reaffirm our dedication to multilateralism and collective action, ensuring a brighter and more equitable future for all. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. Van Claveren, for your important intervention. And I will also like to recognize, I was going to do before the panel, the presence of Mr. Juan Somavia, who not only has an important curriculum, but just to share with you that I worked with him when he was Director General of ILO for 8 years. So it's fantastic, Juan, to have you in this panel, in giving all your history in terms of the first social summit. I will later intervene on behalf of the Regional Economic Commissions, but now I am going to make a 5-minute statement speaking on behalf of ECLAC, and I will refer to our diagnostic of the economic and social situation in Latin American and Caribbean countries. And this is to enter a little bit already into the substance of what we came to talk about here. The transformation of development models is an urgent task in the region, as the region is in a development crisis characterized by three mutually reinforcing traps. These traps condition and limit the achievement of the 2030 agenda and therefore of attaining inclusive social development, a cornerstone for the sustainable development agenda. We see Latin America and the Caribbean mired in three development traps. A low growth trap, or rather a low capacity to grow trap. From 2014 to 23, annual growth in the region averaged only 0.8%. This is less than the 2% of the lost decade of the 1980s. This means that the region has just completed its second lost decade. The region must make efforts to have no more lost decades. To do this, our key recommendation is for countries to urgently step up their growth efforts. And the toolbox to do this is not old-fashioned industrial policies based on subsidies, but new generation productive development policies based on cluster initiatives and cooperation and partnerships between the public, private, and academic sectors, and also based on building from the bottom up, from the territories, not just top-down. One characteristic of this new transformational growth strategy is the need to have a portfolio of dynamizing sectors and work systematically in them. We have proposed 15 such dynamizing sectors. They include energy transition, electrical mobility, circular economy, bioeconomy, agriculture for food security, sustainable water management, and sustainable tourism. Together, these constitute what we call the big push towards sustainability. But our proposal also includes, of course, industrial sectors, such as pharmaceutical and life sciences industry and medical devices. They also include the export of modern services enabled by internet, the care society, and digital government. And of course, taking advantage of the global reconfiguration of production based on nearshoring and friendshoring. The second trap is a high inequality and low social mobility trap. This predicament is rooted in at least 5 key drivers of inequality that reinforce each other. First, inequality is rooted in a productive matrix that has a few high productivity sectors and enterprises that provide a relatively small proportion of employment and a massive predominance of microenterprises and self-employed persons. Most of them in the informal economy, which represent on average 50% of total regional employment, and more than 70% in some countries. Low social mobility is rooted partly in sluggish non-dynamic labor markets and partly in low performance educational systems. Productive development policies are key to both reduce differential productivity-based inequality and to boost growth. Secondly, access to a high-quality education and vocational training system that offers quality learning is a powerful mechanism for upward mobility and inequality reduction. But these are not the kinds of systems most countries have in our region. Dropout rates in secondary education are extremely high, and even those that complete that stage obtain poor results in the PISA test. Third, the fiscal impact of the state tends to be regressive in this region. Even where the distributional impact is positive, the progressivity is very low, in contrast to the sizable progressive impact of the state in OECD countries. One cause of this is regressive tax systems, in which the poor and the middle classes pay proportionally much higher taxes than the rich segments. The other cause, and this is the fourth factor, is weak social protection systems, social policies, and welfare states. It must be said, however, that new technologies offer a great opportunity to make precision social policies and transfers that were not possible 30 years ago at the time of the first World Summit on Social Development. Fifth, despite some progress, gender inequalities continue to be unacceptably high. While the average labor force participation rates of men are around 75%, those of women are 50% or less. And this is only one dimension. Occupational segregation is high, feminicides and other forms of violence against women are also unacceptably high. Other drivers of high inequality and low social mobility, in addition to these five, include discrimination and violations of human rights suffered by certain population groups, and climate change and environmental degradation that have the strongest impacts on the most vulnerable. At ECLAC, our recommendation is that it is important for countries to frame the challenges of inequality around these drivers. And most importantly, it is key that this integrated framework is used to act comprehensively in all of them. Working on just one or two of these drivers is insufficient because they reinforce each other in vicious circles. And these vicious circles must be turned into virtuous ones to reduce inequality significantly. The third trap is a low institutional capacity and ineffective governance trap. Here, special attention must be paid to the challenges of governance of public policies, the technical, operational, political, and prospective, what we call top capabilities of institutions, and on the issues of social dialogue and the political economy of reform and of financing. When thinking about the Second World Summit for Social Development, this is our vision in a very tight 5-minute summary around central challenges in the Latin American and Caribbean region that need to be addressed, and how to promote a more inclusive and cohesive social development. Thank you very much. We will now turn to our keynote speaker, Mrs. Amina Mohammed, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Minister of Foreign Affairs Alberto Van Claveren, Her Excellency, my sister Paula Neveres, our President of the Economic Social Council and the Permanent Representative of Chile to the United Nations, incredible leader for us in New York, and we thank you for it. Excellencies, colleagues, friends, those that are here and those that are there virtually, but I'd like to have a special welcome to my big sister, former President of Chile, Michelle Bachelet, but more importantly, the first leader of our UN Women. And of course, you had left the post of our Human Rights Office. I was about to complain that we didn't have a gender parity panel, and then I saw former President Michelle Bachelet, and I thought, no, she's equal to the task. She'll cover for all those that are not there. But also a special welcome to my friend, Mr. Juan Samovia, who's been at this for a very, very long time, and we stand on your shoulders. I'd like to commend both my brothers, you see they're brothers, commend our leaders from ECLAC and ILO for organizing this important, it's a timely seminar, and for the opportunity for us to try to begin that debate that articulates the vision for the Second World Summit for Social Development, and hopefully that reinforces that last 6 years that we have to go to meeting the promises of Agenda 2030. It's just around the corner. It is to try to deliver on ending poverty and hunger, reducing our inequalities, addressing climate change, building peaceful, just and inclusive societies, and achieving all the SDGs. We must acknowledge that over the last 7 years, we have made progress on some of the goals since 2015. But we also know that the recent succession of crises has made it abundantly clear that this progress has always been fragile and uneven. The challenges that we face today are increasing and intensifying. Political polarization and declining trust in governments and institutions have become obstacles to collective action at both the national and international level. Our humanitarian needs are also skyrocketing, and the social investments necessary to build genuine resilience and promote equal opportunity continue to be inadequate. There is a lack of coherence between social and economic policies and between policy priorities and the financing decisions. The impacts of the triple planetary crisis and climate action have become increasingly apparent and immediate, especially for the most vulnerable populations and countries, particularly our small island developing states. We've seen increasing conflict and the prolonged economic downturn continue to affect countries and ecosystems alike. Our collective failure to prevent and tackle these crises has left people feeling increasingly anxious, divided, and uncertain about their future. And this is particularly so with our young generations who, constantly engaging in the intergenerational conversations we've had on the Summit of the Future, have articulated. At every step, a social perspective on sustainable development, focused on equity, inclusion, social justice, and non-discrimination, still remain central to the achievement of the SDGs. The 1995 Copenhagen Declaration on Social Development established a broad consensus that placed people at the center of development. This vision became the heart of the 2030 Agenda's central pledge to leave no one behind. The second World Social Summit in 2025 can make this pledge a reality and turn the tide to overcome the challenges of our time, embracing the many opportunities that avail themselves. Building on the outcomes of the 2023 SDG Summit and the forthcoming Summit of the Future, a successful social summit will be an opportunity to devise concrete strategies and strengthen commitments to eradicate poverty, reduce inequalities, and adopt sustainable economic models and leave absolutely no one behind. By ushering in a new era of social protection, health coverage, education, decent work, the summit can renew commitments and not just aspirations, but realities in all and accelerate action towards achieving the 2030 Agenda. The summit can also lay a foundation for safeguarding the progress that we have made for decades to come, building on the outcomes of the 4th International Conference on the Financing for the Development in 2025, where member states will address the financial gaps that are needed to scale these social investments and make international financial institutions more inclusive, representative, and receptive to developing country needs. Friends and colleagues, although some member states have expressed a legitimate concern about creating new agendas in the current context, when the task of realizing the SDGs and the Copenhagen commitments is not yet done, this is not the time to change course. Rather, the Social Summit is an opportunity to accelerate the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the Programme of Action for the first World Summit for Social Development, 5 years ahead of the 2030 Agenda. As we embark on the preparatory process towards the summit, let us be mindful of these dynamics. Let us remember that the UN system will have a crucial role in mobilizing political will and greater cooperation. Delivering as one, we must be ready to carry forward the outcomes of the Social Summit, which we hope will build on some very ambitious outcomes that we expect from the Summit of the Future. The UN system is already coalescing around initiatives such as the Global Accelerator on Jobs and Social Protection for a Just Transition, the Food Systems Hub, and the Transforming Education Summit Stocktake. The Social Summit can and should promote these initiatives among member states and within the UN system, and identify areas where we might still have gaps. Excellencies, colleagues, dear friends, in preparing for the World Social Summit, I would urge you to aim high and seek innovative approaches to promote engagement, build trust, and to find consensus in a world that finds this so hard today. At every step, we must ensure that all stakeholders have a say. In doing so, we will accelerate progress towards the SDGs from now to 2030 and beyond. It's our chance to strengthen trust and solidarity between people, governments, and the UN by delivering on people's hopes, their aspirations, their dreams for a healthy safety and well-being of themselves, their families, their communities. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, for your inspiring words and call to aim high in our ambitions. And now I would like to, I'm going to moderate the first part of the panel, and then my colleague Gilbert is going to moderate the second. So I have the pleasure of introducing the panel for this high-level dialogue. Paula Narvaez, President of the Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Chile to the United Nations. Gilbert Hombo, Director General of the ILO. Lee Jungua, Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs. Akim Steiner, Administrator, United Nations Development Program, UNDP. Sima Bahous, Executive Director, UN Women. Ku Dongyu, Director General of the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, and Juan Somavia, Ambassador and former Permanent Representative of Chile to the United Nations, Chair of the Preparatory Committee of the World Summit for Social Development in Copenhagen in 1995, and former Director General of the ILO. And finally, Tedros Ghebreyesus, Director General of the World Health Organization, who we will show a video that he has sent us. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here. Thank you very much, all of you, for having accepted the invitation that we did jointly with the ILO to this high-level seminar. I'm very welcome to ECLAC. This panel is focused on the reflection about the main themes and issues that will be desirable to address at the Second World Summit on Social Development. The panel is expected to be interactive and participatory. Therefore, the dynamics are based on 2 rounds. In the first one, each panelist will have 8 minutes, followed by a second round in which each one of you will have a brief 2 minutes to make interventions and reactions and comments. Let me open our dialogue with Ambassador Paula Narváez, President of the Economic and Social Council. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Gracias, José Manuel Salazar. Gracias por tenernos en casa. Thank you so much to all of you for being here today. Let me start by say thank you also to Mr. Alberto Van Claveren, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Chile, Minister of Social Affairs, Javiera Toro, my dear sister, Amina Mohamed, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, former President of Chile, Michelle Bachelet, my dear fellow panelists, excellencies, distinguished delegates, friends. It is my pleasure to be here today, this afternoon with you in my country, to discuss how we can contribute to strengthening global commitments towards the Second World Summit on Social Development. Firstly, I would like to thank ECLAC and ILO for the invitation to be part of this important panel. As you know, the world came together in Copenhagen in 1995 with a vision of people-centered development. The World Social Summit, or the World Summit for Social Development, was a milestone in multilateral cooperation, establishing a global commitment to social development that resonates with us to this day. In the decades that followed, the world witnessed unprecedented social progress. However, this path of rapid development, alongside the complex challenges of our changing world, has left many people and countries behind. Millions of people are living in poverty, hunger, and malnutrition are on the rise. Humanitarian needs are escalating, and the impacts of climate change continue to weaken countries and communities. Additionally, conflicts are emerging within and between countries. We are all aware of the negative impacts of these crises on progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals, sometimes stalling and even reversing progress. Excellencies, today we are at an inflection point. Insecurity about the future and distrust in institutions are increasing, eroding our social fabric and our ability to collectively achieve common goals. It is time to respond by paving the way towards a resilient, inclusive, and sustainable future with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Copenhagen Declaration on Social Development as our foundations. The Second World Summit on Social Development in 2025 would be an opportunity to forge a new global consensus around the social values and policies that are essential for sustainable development. The summit will reinvigorate efforts to achieve the SDGs by 2030 and safeguard long-term progress. In my role as the President of the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations, I would like to highlight that the Council and its subsidiary bodies, especially those focusing on the social dimensions of sustainable development, are well positioned to contribute to supporting intergovernmental discussions leading to the 2025 Social Summit. The Commission for Social Development, the subsidiary body of the ECOSOC system, responsible for monitoring the implementation of the Copenhagen Declaration on Social Development and the Programme of Action, has a crucial role to play. In recent years, it has focused on key issues such as poverty eradication, inequality, the role of digital technologies in social development and well-being, productive employment, and decent work for all as priority themes of its annual sessions. The outcomes of these sessions can serve as a valuable body of knowledge for the preparations for the Second World Summit on Social Development in 2025. It is noteworthy that the Commission will deliberate on a priority theme emphasizing solidarity, social inclusion, and social cohesion in February 2025, echoing the messages in previous interventions by the SDG, and this priority theme will be very timely as we advance progress on the commitments of Copenhagen and the goals and targets of the 2030 Agenda in a context of persistent obstacles and emerging challenges. The session of the Commission for Social Development can also consider making recommendations to Member States on elements of the outcome of the Social Summit later in the year, drawing on its expertise as the custodian of the Copenhagen Declaration and Programme of Action, on which the Second World Summit for Social Development is to build. Allow me to offer some additional examples of how ECOSOC can support preparation for the Second World Summit on Social Development. The special meeting of ECOSOC, convened in January 2024 here in Chile, focused on a fundamental pillar of social development, namely decent work. Strong messages emerged on the need for more decent jobs as a crucial response to poverty and increasing inequalities. Participants emphasized the importance of looking towards future demographic trends and technological innovation, understanding that emerging technologies are not an end in themselves, but a critical means to improve well-being, productivity, and achievement of the SDGs. The essential role of equality education and skills training was highlighted, while also emphasizing the imperative to close the digital divide and promote just energy transitions that facilitate connectivity. Sessions highlighted specific actions to support the most vulnerable in the labor market, including women, youth, low-skilled workers, persons with disabilities, migrants, older persons, and indigenous peoples through better access to social protection programs. The substantive segments of ECOSOC could also help generate ideas and policy recommendations relevant to the preparation for the Social Summit in 2025. The High-Level Political Forum offers a comprehensive analysis of progress made across the SDGs, including poverty eradication, zero hunger, climate action, institutional strengthening, and partnership advancement. It also provides an opportunity to highlight the specific needs of country groups such as least developed countries, small island developing states, and middle-income countries. Insights that would be useful to underscore the progress made and challenges encountered in advancing social development. The Financing for Development Forum is an opportunity to emphasize necessary investment in areas such as social protection, both globally and domestically, and the Science, Technology and Innovation Forum can provide insights into digital innovations and emerging technologies that can support countries and communities in advancing together. Additionally, I will host a special meeting on artificial intelligence next week in New York to bring all stakeholders to the table on how we can harness AI to advance sustainable development while keeping people at the center of our efforts. From the ECOSOC presidency, we have highlighted the importance of care for life, planet sustainability. At the 15th Regional Conference on Women in Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC member states agreed in the Buenos Aires commitment to transition towards a care society as a proactive notion to progress towards sustainable development styles that emphasize the sustainability of life and the planet and recognize care as a right of people to care for, be cared for, and exercise self-care. I would like also to recognize the role of ECLAC and UN Women in the work with member states in this area. As a region, we should be proud to have a roadmap towards a care society, which we must continue not only in anticipation of the next regional conference on Latin America and the Caribbean in 2025 in Mexico, but also within the framework of the Second World Summit on Social Development. As the Executive Secretary of ECLAC mentioned, advancing the care society calls us today and every day to achieve gender equality and a more productive, inclusive, and sustainable future. Before concluding, I would like to share a very insightful experience that I recently had while chairing the Youth Forum a few weeks ago in New York. Often representatives of states and multilateral organizations feel disappointed, and I will even say frustrated with the indicators and the harsh reality, and we struggle to identify where the engine for improving this world is. It is in the youth. In the Youth Forum, I saw commitment, passion, willingness, and transformative qualities which are so necessary today. As president of ECOSOC, we have joined the Secretary General's invitation to put young people at the center of the debate within the United Nations system. Every generation must have a mission to fulfill. Thanks to the generation that led the consensus reached in Copenhagen, to whom I take the opportunity to pay tribute through the figure of Ambassador Juan Somavia, who accompanies us today here in this panel, and is also the engine of this meeting today. We were able to progress towards the Millennium Development Goals and subsequently the 2030 Agenda with the Sustainable Development Goals. That's why we are here today. The policy recommendations of the special meeting we held in January this year at ECLAC will contribute to the deliberation for the future summit, which in turn will be part of the foundations from which the Second World Summit on Social Development in 2025 will be built. Youth must be part of this continuity process as they will be responsible for leading the post-2030 agenda and the world we will hand over to future generations. Dear colleagues, distinguished delegates, friends, ECOSOC remains committed to doing its part and contributing to a successful social summit in 2025. I look forward to the panel's discussions today and to hearing more about how the road to 2025 can be most conducive to achieving an ambitious outcome that responds to the needs of our people and planet. And I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Narvaez, for this very interesting intervention, and congratulations for all the work that you have done and continue to do with member states, and you did on the resolution in which countries agreed to convene the Second World Summit for Social Development. I now have the honor to give the floor to our colleague and co-host, Mr. Gilbert Humbo, Director General of the ILO.
Thank you so much, Jose Manuel. Distinguished participant, you'll certainly agree with me that it's a bit hard to believe that almost 30 years have passed since Copenhagen in 1995, and that in those days in Copenhagen, and I don't know if in addition to Juan Somavia, some of you maybe were there. I know you start working before ILO Convention Against Child Labor. But in those days, it was the largest ever gathering of world leaders. And the world leaders went to Copenhagen for this summit. It was not like, we're going to the UNGA, the UN General Assembly, and we want to spend a few hours to discuss this issue. They really decided, because of the importance of the matter, to go to Copenhagen for this first World Summit on Social Development. But for us to know the importance that this summit is for ILO, it was a pivotal moment for ILO because our tripartite constituent, government, employers, and our trade unions made very significant contribution and participation at this summit. As the president of ECOSOC just mentioned, not only we know that Copenhagen came with this importance of having a consensus on the way forward to put human-centered approach to development, but in the ILO context, we made a commitment to prioritize full and productive employment, social cohesion, and the eradication of poverty. We took, in fact, in Copenhagen, the first steps towards one of the ILO's most important declarations. I'm referring to the Declaration on the Fundamental Principle and Rights at Work, which essentially, as I'm speaking, is referred to what we call the 10 Core Convention, where whether or not a member state has ratified those conventions, all member states have the obligation to implement them, whether or not they have ratified those core conventions. And that starts from the Copenhagen. Now that we are preparing for the second summit, our goal must be to make an even greater impact. Obviously, the world is not the same as in 1995, so it's important that we identify what we believe are the major challenges, what the key success factors are to be, and how the UN family can really support a member state in making sure that not only this summit is inclusive, we listen and we act, and it's not yet another summit on that. But the challenge that we face today is clear that we also need to take that into consideration. Whether we like it or not, the world today is much more unpredictable, more unstable compared to 1995, and I, very regret to say that more divided. All of us, we know with the war and the conflict since COVID, and I can go on. I'm sure the Director General of FAO will certainly come back of the state of food and food insecurity. A colleague from the WHO will again highlight the where we stand with the health and the lesson we learned from COVID, the energy crisis and its transition, the inequalities that are reaching alarming levels. And for a long time, when we talk inequality, we want to talk about between countries or between the North and the South. But in fact, inequality within countries and even countries in the South has worsened on that. So the challenge we are facing are quite totally different, to the point where some will argue that we just need a second summit, and that Copenhagen should not even be a reference given the total different challenge and environment we are evolving. I don't want to. I'm sure we will have time to again come back on that. I really want to recognize here the leadership that we have from Amina Mohammed, our DSG, in really bringing all of us together. In this case, through UN DESA, USG Lee, and in his whole team, and all the UN agencies that I see around the table here, and that all of us, I know we are gung-ho and predisposed to work with the co-facilitators and the member states in moving forward. From where I stand, 2 or 3 things that I must say that I'm very concerned that we really need to, at this early stage, to see how we deal with that, is the level of trust amongst member states. We are in a point where if we can make, as part of the prerequisite, we can make an effort to improve the trust that we have amongst groups, or whether you call it region or groups of countries, etc. It will be quite very, very helpful in moving forward in this political, what is quite politically, of course, important and sensible to all of us. The second thing is the need for us to make every effort to adopt what could be considered really as a universal and inclusive, consensus-based outcome declaration. And thirdly, and I'll stop there, Jose Manuel, not to take too much time, the importance for us to ensure that the day after the summit, how do we go with implementing the outcome on the ground? Because at the end of the day, what counts is the difference we go on the ground, is the difference we make with those that do not have access to vaccine, is the difference we make to the 4 billion that has zero social protection, and the difference for the 800 million that cannot secure 1 food a day, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you for being with us. Thank you, Gilbert, for raising these very, very relevant aspects. How to make greater impact in a world that has changed drastically, I think, is a very good question, short and sharp, that must be in our heads as we prepare for the summit. I will now call upon Mr. Lee Jung-hua, Undersecretary General of the Economic and Social Affairs.
Thank you, distinguished co-chair. Well, first of all protocol observed. Let me congratulate the co-chairs for organizing this timely and important event. I just want to share a few observations with distinguished participants. The Second World Summit for Social Development will center the global development efforts on people, their well-being, their shared hopes, and their shared future. We acknowledge that the 1995 World Social Summit, or World Summit for Social Development, established a global commitment to the people-centered development that resonates with us even today. So 2030 agenda carries this commitment forward with a time-bound goals and its pledge to leave no one behind. But even so, making lasting and transformative change that supports the shared prosperity and inclusive societies on a healthy planet, while it's possible, but it's extremely difficult and challenged. When we met last year at the SDG Summit, the depth of the challenge was made clear. There are glaring gaps in progress towards our internationally agreed development goals. Nearly 1/3 of the SDG targets have shown no progress or have regressed below the baseline set in 2015. By 2030, we are looking at nearly 600 million people trapped in extreme poverty. So for the first time in a decade, inequalities between the rich and the poor countries are growing, while the inequalities within countries remained at the all-time high. At the Second World Summit for Social Development, member states will be able to address these gaps and challenges and make the tangible commitments to deliver the to drive the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. Many lessons have learned for the decades of implementing the Copenhagen Declaration and the programs of action. These lessons, coupled with experiences from the 2030 Agenda, will set the stage for a well-informed and impactful World Social Summit. Today's global political landscape is marked with growing conflict and the political tensions that are raising the risk of the social and economic fragmentation. Persistent poverty and inequalities, climate injustice, and the rapid and even technological change are generating uncertainty, insecurity, polarization, and distrust. We need to look at these challenges with fresh eyes. We must use the new and innovative tools to get ahead of them, including the potential of the properly regulated and equally accessible digital technologies and artificial intelligence. So, dear colleagues, by 2025, our preparations for the Second World Summit for Social Development will be informed by the outcome of the SDG Summit, Summit of the Future, and the other landmark agreements. The Second World Summit for Social Development will therefore be very uniquely positioned to build on those commitments and deliver a meaningful outcome that addresses the social issues and also generate more impact on the lives and livelihoods of the people. So Secretary General actually envisaged the Social Summit to be a different form of the global deliberations that lives up to the values of the trust and the listening. So we believe that broad consultations in the lead up to the summit will be essential for a meaningful outcome. People must be actively engaged in the preparations and deliberations. What the process looks like is ultimately up to the member states, but a process that fosters the participation and accountability will restore the trust of the people in the government and also in the United Nations. So how do we get there? In terms of the policy frameworks that the Social Summit should move forward based on the DAS's analytical and the support to the various international processes, which includes ECLAC, General Assembly, and the HLPF, a few key areas we believe that we need to highlight. First, integrating social policy into a broader whole of the government approach. A focus on this will certainly strengthen the coherence between the social and the economic policies. Second, ensuring consistencies between the policy priorities and the financing decisions by creating physical space to increase investment in people. We need to clearly alignment of the national budgets with the goals and the targets of the 2030 Agenda to spur the investment in education, healthcare, sanitation, clean energy, housing, and social protection, among others. Moving beyond the GDP in measuring progress and the value at the national levels would also be important here, as it would elevate the value assigned to the delivery of these fundamental services at all levels. Third, ensuring that the physical policies are truly redistributable. Taxation must be the more progressive, and its burden should not fall disproportionately on those at the bottom. Finally, driving stronger international cooperation and increase the international coordination, such as labor rights, social protection, health, climate resilience, and taxation. Our multilateral system and the global framework must work for the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee, for a very important and thoughtful intervention. I now my pleasure to offer the floor to Mr. Achim Steiner, Administrator of UNDP.
Thank you, Jose Manuel and Gilbert, as our co-hosts, for having us here. Deputy Secretary General, I know the Minister had to leave. Distinguished fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen. I was imagining what Juan Sumavia was thinking somewhere around 94, 95, when he was chairman of the preparatory committee for that World Summit on Social Development. It's actually a slip of the tongue that occurred to me is quite interesting, isn't it? WSSD, WSSD. Two very different tracks, but I'll return to that in a moment. And I was imagining what has happened in those, 29, next year, 30 years between that moment when the United Nations really did bring the world together to confront two of the most fundamental Achilles heels of modern post-war development, however you want to refer to it. On the one hand, in 1992, the Earth Summit really took on this issue of sustainability, becoming increasingly a threat to people, to development. And then the World Social Summit really taking on the issue of equity or inequity and all that it was producing in terms of, yes, breakthroughs, but also enormous setbacks. And Juan, since I sit here today alongside my esteemed colleagues as the administrator of UNDP, I also looked back a little bit and I was struck by how the Human Development Report was almost the companion to the World Summit on both sustainable development and on social development, and in 1994 began to already articulate many of the threads that would lead to some of the outcomes in Copenhagen, not least the concept of human security and others. So as we meet here, and when Jose Manuel, you were speaking at the beginning, I was struck in particular by one thing that would have been unthinkable probably somewhere around 1995, including in this building here. And that would be that you, as the head of ECLAC, would list 16 areas in which Latin America and the Caribbean, I think it was 16 or 17, should focus or could focus on in terms of accelerating growth and economic development. If I recall correctly, the first 3 or 4 essentially spoke to the green economy and the green transitions as the drivers of economic growth. Remember the era in which those summits took place, including the 1995 summit. It was the era where green was the enemy of growth, where environment was, if anything, a competitor to the social development agenda. And here we are in the year 2024, in the lead up to the next summit on not only the future, but then next year, the Social Development Summit. And I think we perhaps should reflect a little bit also on some of the remarkable breakthroughs that happened, because we have seen many setbacks, and I don't need to list them. Most of us, sadly, spend a lot of our time articulating those. But a couple struck me because they're important, not because they negate the setbacks, but they also point to how public policy and choices make a difference. Take poverty. China, 700 million people or more, lifted out of poverty. India, more than 250 million people lifted out of poverty in the last 10, 12 years. Chile, interesting enough, when I looked up the statistic, a remarkable journey from 1990, when 68.5% of Chile's population lived in poverty, to somewhere around 6.5 or 6.8% today. 68.5 to 6.5. And there are many other such examples I could cite. Another one that struck me about how things can change if you also take the lens of inclusion and exclusion for a moment. Because one is equity and sustainability, the DNA, so to speak, of sustainable development. The other one is inclusion and exclusion. When the internet first appeared, and in the year 1995, there was a total of 16 million users with access to the internet. This year, or close to perhaps next year, that number will have risen to 5.5 billion people. There are still many who don't have access, but you realize that in 1995, the total world population was 5.7 billion people. So in just under 29 years, with an entirely new technology, we have succeeded because of a very deliberate set of policies, building digital ecosystems, digital public infrastructure, putting inclusion at the forefront. We have added the entire world population at the time of the World Summit in 1995 to have access to the internet. I say this because sometimes averages
are very powerful, but an average never speaks to specific realities, and also aggregate numbers are sometimes very powerful, but they also mask that countries have made very different choices. We are in the company of Michelle Bachelet. Where would Chile's story of development in the last 2 decades be without some very deliberate, sometimes very brave, sometimes very painful interventions, which also we as UNDP were proud to accompany with some of the analysis that we, through the Chile Human Development Report, but also the report on Desiguales and others, try to reflect that in Chilean society, despite this extraordinary number going from 68.5 to 6.5, inequality and unfairness had become corrosive to the core of Chile's democracy. And it is in that context that I think, as we look forward to the next World Social Summit, it is also important that we perhaps bring more clearly to the attention of policymakers, of leaders, of actors in our society, including the private sector, not amorphous, those who finance development, those who monopolize development, those who prevent development, and those who actually invest in people and development. Because it is the private sector in our world of today that has by far the largest financial scope. And I'm saying this very consciously in a country called Chile, where you have often in the past put, in a sense, the role of the state alongside that of private sector and enterprise in a different way than other countries. Let me end by also briefly touching on how, Gilbert, something you mentioned just now, trust. You spoke principally about trust between nations. I think the UNDP Human Development Report of 23-24 has also put a spotlight of how the erosion of trust by people in their own state and government has created the kind of climate in which we see not only polarization within societies, but increasing that polarization, that fear and insecurity being weaponized in a way that is turning countries against each other. And if there is anything that would give the World Social Summit a particular, perhaps priority, it is to remind the world once again that progress, only in confrontation and competition with one another, is unlikely to succeed. On the contrary, it will undermine both the achievements of the last 30 years and it will exacerbate the very Achilles heels of our world today. Inequality and sustainability are not two separate universes anymore. The way we are able to weave them together, as the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals did in 2015, will, I think, also mark in 2025 the moment whether a WSSD really does take us forward or simply laments the lack of progress. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. Those very thoughtful indeed comments. I have now the pleasure to give the floor to Mrs. Sima Bahous, UN Women Executive Director.
Thank you very much, my dear brother Jose and my dear brother Gilbert, DSG, our leader in development throughout the system and in so many different ways on gender equality as well. You are our champion. And Madame Bachelet, former president of Chile, but also the first UN Women Executive Director, Madam Excellency, the Minister of Social Development. Also, it's great to see you here again. I would like to say that I'm very honored and privileged to be here today and to participate actually in this important international seminar to help us all shape our vision for the Second World Summit for Social Development. Thank you, my colleagues again, Jose from the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, and all your colleagues, and also Gilbert and the International Labour Organization and your colleagues for inviting UN Women to this critical discussion. Colleagues, allow me to begin with acknowledging that in many ways, the world is a better place for women and girls than it was generations ago, than it was maybe in 1995. And the Latin American and the Caribbean region stands proof to this. Feminists in this region have led the way in transforming society, from addressing gender-based violence head-on to fighting for equal pay. This region is also leading crucial work in recognizing unpaid work, unpaid care, and the contribution that caregivers to society, social cohesion, and the economy has on women and girls, but also on society at large. This reminds us all that progress is possible, but it is never necessarily guaranteed. For many women and girls, the world remains an unsafe and unequal place. Let me give you a few examples. 1 in every 10 women in the world lives today in extreme poverty. In conflict areas, women are 7.7 times more likely to live in extreme poverty than men. Climate change is set to leave 236 million more women and girls hungry by 2030, twice as many as men. All this is happening while gender equality backlash is on the rise globally, when the values on which our multilateral system was founded are being questioned, and when war has chosen many times over diplomacy and dialogue in too many parts of the world. Women and girls bear the brunt of all this. Colleagues, we know that we can reverse this daunting situation and that we can advance gender equality and women's rights everywhere. The Second World Summit for Social Development, which will take place in the same year as the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration, provides us with one such opportunity. In advancing gender equality, we must also advance on the promises made in Copenhagen at the First World Summit in 1995 and on the potential of all the Sustainable Development Goals. Gender equality is both the precondition and the accelerator for sustainable development, for peace, and for security. If women are not at the table of development decision-making, if women are not at the tables of humanitarian decision-making, if women are not at the tables of peacemaking, none of these three will happen. So let me also tell you that more than 100 women and girls could leave poverty behind if governments prioritized economic empowerment for women. Almost 300 million jobs could be created by 2035 through investments in the care systems, such as provision of childcare and elderly care. And closing gender gap employment could boost gross economic products per capita by 20% across all regions of the world. So we do have the solutions to advance gender equality. We only need to make the investments to implement. And this is our key challenge today. The areas needing immediate investment to implement are clear and were recognized and affirmed by member states in the agreed conclusions of the 68th session of the Commission on the Status of Women this March this year. First and foremost, we must invest in peace that lasts and that is inclusive of the voices, priorities, and agency of women and girls and young people. Beyond this, we must integrate a gender perspective into financing for development commitments, expand fiscal space for investments to end women and girl poverty, implement gender-responsive economic and social policies, transform laws, policies, and social norms such that they advance the rights of women and girls, guarantee women's access to land, to healthcare, education, decent work, and social protection, invest in the care system, as I said earlier, and promote women's leadership and networks at all levels. These are commitments that we made in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Since 2015, it has become abundantly clear that the Sustainable Development Goals cannot be achieved without the full and meaningful integration and investment of gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls everywhere. SDG 5 is the linchpin of all the SDGs. Equity, inclusion are also key. Dear colleagues, the state of the world demands that we channel our energy, that we make the best use of our skills and invest with conviction and commitment to make the world a better place as we look forward to the upcoming social summit. We must redouble our efforts to revitalize our policies, renew our investments, reinvigorate our partnerships to achieve gender equality and sustainable development for the benefit of all women and girls, but also for the benefit of all of us. I have the full confidence that together we can and we should. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now it's my pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Ku Dong-yu, Director General of Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO.
Thank you, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. 2030 is close at hand. We haven't achieved what we had set out to do. End poverty in all its forms everywhere, SDG 1, and end hunger and achieve the food security, improve the nutrition, all SDG 2. Also, Akim, you remind me, in 1995, I was studying Wageningen, and the FAO DG that time, Mr. Jack Diouf. Afterwards, he chaired the first World Food Summit in November 13 to 17, 1996. That time, population of the world it was about 5.8 billion. After 30 years, it's more than 8 billion. So it means 2.4 billion population increased during past 3 decades when we reached 2026. For sure, at least 2.4 billion more. And then next 30 years, when we reach 2056, definitely will be 10 billion population on this planet. So that's a clear message, because I didn't see the UN population here. That's the big non-negotiable increasement for the food, for the environment pressure, and for the rural area, because majority come from rural area and majority from the developing nations. Second, also there are a lot of middle class come. And more important, that time will be 70% at least living in the urban area. So that's a 3 force come the bigger challenge for us. Not only food security, what we face now, and for future even more serious. So that's real created social inequality, not only between poor and rich, between the urban and the rural, between man and woman. There's 3 levels of image. Honorable President, you are president. Because a lot of people here talk about their own sectors. But look at any government. I was also local government leaders in China. So we have to look at it comprehensively. That's 3 real challenge. I don't know which organization alone can deal with. Not the FAO, definitely. Not the ILO. Even not the UN.
Women.
I don't say women, men also. So because it's a real challenge. That's what I want to mention. Second, what is solution from 3 levels? First is UN level. We always say UN level, we don't have power, we don't have money, but we do have something. Value added beyond any individual nations. No matter how big or small, how rich, how poor you are. We need a UN. We need a UN special agency. What is value added from all the UN families? Do you have an answer to that? During the past 5 years since I came here, as a FODG. First, we have a data, information. No matter how strong and big, like America friend, or how small a small island, or less than 10,000, but we need 197 members like FAO we have, largest. We have 14,000 staff work on that. We can get since 1947, we published the annual report on the SOFIA, food security. So no any other organization can replace the UN. That's the data and information. Second, network. Third is a platform. I don't have the time, 5 minutes, so I will finish within 5 minutes. 8, oh, sorry. No, I was a professor. Give me 80 minutes, I can continue. Anyway, platform. Nowadays, the digital world, we need a platform. But UN is an authoritative platform. We have a lot of other sort of platform. That's why our message, our thoughtful suggestions is different from any individual, professional, or informal consultation, because that's show the authority platform. And third, I think also, we have so many experts. No any individual members have covered all the experts, but we can play the complementary role from the developing, from developed, from global south to the global north. So if we can exploit the UN value added, and we know for sure all the donors, investors, since I come FAO, I don't say donors. Any money come from the global north or OECD country, including Chile, your investment, even for humanitarian, short-term investment, not only donors. Donation is only some kind of a humanitarian care, but the investment for the future. Sooner or later, you cut the trees in here, Yamase, and then also you have a small butterfly here, will be influence the other parts of the world. So we have to change the business model to address the issues. Because everyone behave like a professor, answer the why, how, what, when, where. I think all the people understand why, so important. Yeah, but how, when, where, what? And finally, it's delivered on the country, on the community. That's something we should change the business model. And the last, I'm closing, FAO, we are willing to cooperate with you. Because any country, ask the honorable former president. And I met her so many times in China when I was a responsible minister. Any country, member, Minister of Agriculture and Rural Affairs, always deal with others, 20 or 30 ministers. So for UN Summit, the Food Summit, the Environment Summit, the Education Summit, and coming your summit, we will be there to support you. That's why we published the Rural Women report last year, and I established the first ever in the history. It's got the assessment cultural support is humble. I established a special office of the youth and the women, and approved by the council last year with a 7 post, not ad hoc group. We need this institutionalized arrangement. So I don't know any other organization have the special office of the youth and the women. I know women is so important. Without a woman, without a human being. I'm a geneticist. Yeah, because we come from mama society, yeah? Not from the our society. Anyway, last, I said, if we're willing to offer the technical support, all the related to social, especially in the rural areas, and science innovation. Not only technical science, we need the social science. Because people talk of science, always natural science. But this complicated world, we need the social science, new cutting-edge social science, evidence-based, data-based. That's a way we can maybe help the members to change on the ground. Thank you all for the opportunity for me to talk in front of you. And I'm ready. Also, I supported the DSG and SG Food Summit. Yeah? They called because we used to call it the World Food Summit. And then the SG said called it the UN Food System Summit. It's okay. Anyway, it's food and culture. Thank you. Food, we are going to have food, yeah? I hope.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dongyu, for sharing your valuable perspective. I will now call upon Mr. Juan Somavia, Ambassador and former Permanent Representative of Chile to the UN, and former chair of the Preparatory Committee for the first World Social Summit.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for the very kind words that I've received in relation to what I've done in this issue. And you can imagine that it's very emotional for me to be here, because this is the first high-level meeting of the United Nations thinking about what the Social Summit is going to be about. And to be able to be here and share with you my own experience is very emotional. I would never have thought that there would be a second social summit, because normally when you do the second one, you try to forget the first one. This one, it has highlighted it. It's quite extraordinary as a political process. So thank you so much. Let me pick up on some of the last things that were said. I think that there has to be a whole of society effort, a whole of United Nations effort, and a whole of government effort. And the words are convergence, coherence, policy integration. That's what it's all about. And it's extremely difficult because we have been saying this for a long, long time, and we have a big, big difficulty of doing it. And particularly we have a difficulty among our institutions. I talk as, well, the ILO gets in your heart, and then you continue thinking, as an ILO person. So I'm very glad to be able to do this in front of my friend Humbo. We have a problem. We don't have an easy way of working together, of thinking about policy integration, etc. I want to thank you also for the very clear explanations of the things that need to be done, the situation in which we find ourselves, and how do we move forward. My look at it is going to be more from the perspective of the United Nations. What does this summit mean to the United Nations? So I will begin with the first thing. The basic notion of the convening resolution that the Second World Social Summit is launched in order to stimulate the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. This leads to a key conclusion: the emergence of the Copenhagen Summit, further developed by the 2030 Agenda, generated the vision, the image, you looked at it, you saw it, of a United Nations Social Development Mandate. We don't normally talk that way. We don't talk about the social mandate of the UN, but this is what it is. So the notion is not new. Social progress is in the first lines of the Charter, so it's not about discovering, no, but it's about thinking that if we have a United Nations mandate, how do we work together in order to make it happen? What I find about what is very strong about this notion, it's this certain marriage between the Social Summit and Agenda 2030, is that the summit has been what you have been saying, but the linkage is very strong because if you take a look at the 2030 Agenda, it has 7 of its goals, which are purely social goals, and it has 3 goals which are mixed. The decent work is decent work and growth, and others are the set. But in the end, you have 10 goals that are social, and you have that means about 2/3 of the goals are social.
So it's a marriage made in heaven, if you want. It couldn't be more logical to think about a second social summit based in order to push forward the 2030 agenda. So I think that aspect is extremely important, and it's that process that made me think about highlighting, the social agenda, the UN social agenda, social development agenda as a whole, as something that we are all involved in it, and then we have to do what you were saying. How do we go about it? And I would like to take the issue of what and how. It's something also that Jose Manuel has worked on very much. We're very good at being ambitious about what to do, and we're less good at saying, well, how to do it. And I think that this summit should address that. There are extraordinary obstacles to social development, and they are permanent, and it's not something that simply, that occurs sometime. No. Any social objective is a permanent struggle. To move towards social development, it's swimming against the current, by definition. It's swimming against the current, and I think that we have to take that into account, because if we say that this is what we want to do, we have to immediately think, what is the obstacle going to be? Why is it possible that this hasn't happened? Particularly because since we agree on these things, and then we say but naturally it's the responsibility of government. That's what we say. And of course, it's good that the UN system helps in this. But if things don't happen, it's not really the responsibility of the United Nations, it's the responsibility of governments who said, I am going to take this. So it's in the interest of the countries that actually agree on something to immediately discuss the obstacles. And not that they're suddenly, each one looking at it in its own reality. Of course, things are going to be different, and we have to be able to look at that. But the simple notion that we have to do the what with the how, I think it's another dimension of what we're looking at. The context. The context is so different. The Copenhagen was and called itself a summit of hope. It happened in the context of the end of the Cold War. And a little parenthesis, I suggested the creation of the summit when I chaired the social committee of ECOSOC. And I proposed it as the head, as social committee of ECOSOC, not as ambassador of Chile, because I didn't want to embarrass my government if it didn't work. So so I said it on my own, and it would be Somavia with this crazy idea that didn't work. Yeah. But what we did is an extraordinary thing. It was presented, there was lots of consensus, but there was opposition. So the decision was taken to ask the Secretary General to consult on the feasibility of it. Now, knowing the way the UN worked, the people that were against it knew that they go and talk to the Secretary General and say, Secretary General, this is not going to fly, it's going to be a complicated thing, etc., etc., etc. What happened was surprising for those that thought that way, because the Secretary General asked me to carry out the consultation. And I carried out the consultation, and when he appointed me, he said, look, I'm giving you this mandate from ECOSOC, but you have another mandate, consult and convince, he told me. But why am I saying this? Because I did consult, so I moved around. And what I discovered already at that time is that even those that were against it had social problems. So it became very evident that everybody needed to have a place to meet on social issues. But I come back to the hope. It was a summit of hope, and it was a summit which was the hope. Well, finally, we can't continue having the peace and security agenda on top of us and that being the major problem, etc., etc., etc. Now that it's not there, maybe we can create a space for social issues. Maybe we can create that space for social issues, and we did. And you had the biggest meeting of heads of state because it was real. what we are now dealing with is not the same process. So we have to be able to adapt and to think. You don't have this massive political support with which the social summit was born. Not that it came afterwards, but it was born that way. No, this is a UN process decision. The Secretary General said he liked it. Paula Narvaez made a fantastic job of ensuring that, ACOSOC did its job. Then it was convened and we have the co-facilitators. It's a totally different process. But yet the substance is the same. So we have to see how we adapt the process to the reality that this has to come from the local. So my suggestion is, as soon as the agreement of doing the next stage, this has to become local, among other things, because the Summit of the Future is occupying the space in New York. So to get it out of New York and bring it back home, make it, and what can the UN do? It can do three things. It can have the resident coordinators, organized nationally to help countries and, in the whole of society, define their priorities. No problem. It's not too heavy. It's 100 and something resident coordinators. They can, dedicate a bit of time to this. The second one, the regional commissions. We will have with us here the coordinator of the regional commissions for year 2024. There's an enormous amount of work that can be done through the regional commissions in order to define what are the strategic interests of each of the different regions. There are things that are basic, but there are things that are different. And the analyzing the countries also, because the specificity of a country is, we need to know it's a knowledge base that is essential for the decision making to understand the detail with which a country is looking at a particular problem. So if you don't go local, and this is sort of you won't have that. And the third thing is, first the regional coordinators, then regional commission. The third one is something that we were talking about. How do the specialized agencies work together, special agencies, funds, programs, bodies, the whole package? How do we get this whole of UN, whole of social mandate organizations, if you want to call it that way, etc.? We absolutely need to do that because we do not have, there's nobody that will come and say, let me tell you how it's done. It's not there. We've got to invent it. And of course, it's easier to do things I've always done it than to suddenly say, look, half of the things I'm doing, I need to think about changing them. It's objectively complicated. But we're facing that type of questions, and what Akim was saying, and goes in that direction. The things that you have written, etc. So that is an essential thing that I think is important. The other thing is when we're talking about atmosphere, it was a summit of hope. What is the situation today? People are disconnected. People are mistrustful. People are looking at the institutionalities and they say, look, nobody there is really caring about my problems, So the sense of loneliness in terms of looking at your problem and then asking yourself who is caring for that problem is very, very big. So if you go and say, look, there was a meeting in the United Nations on social summit. It was on social issues, and it was a summit, and here's the document. Forget about it. That has no meaning whatsoever. But if you go through the resident coordinators, and you go through the regional commissions, and you go through a cooperation among, social mandate agencies, you can do two things. You can do the consultation, you can help, but at the same time you can inform. You can tell people that this is going on, that this is a reason for which it's going on, that so you create a capacity of countries to understand and to know and to be a part of it. And I think that is absolutely essential, and I believe it can be easily done. It's not a complicated thing to do. We just have to decide that we want to do it. Another aspect of the question is the following. Again, in terms of the way it was before, the way it is now. If you have this disquiet of people with institutionality, we have a problem, because it also refers to the UN. It's not that no. The UN in 1995 was part of the hope is that could now get the UN to move forward, that you didn't have this weight of the Cold War and blah, 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 and you felt, it was in the air. It's nothing like that in the air today, on the contrary, And what is the UN doing about it? Oh, how many times we hear about what is the UN doing about it? So we have to look at that, and my feeling is the following, that this has been not just because of what is going on today, but this has been, in general, something that is directed at the peace and security mandate of the United States, of the United Nations. And then I ask myself, well, does this distance from the security issues, how does it apply to social issues? Do we have on this social mandate the same distance that you have in this other field, and it includes, the crisis of multilateralism, etc. And then I began to look at it and I began to see that no, if you take your own responsibilities, you don't have a systematic criticism of what you're doing. You have, as is normal, people criticize you because this policy or that policy or this other thing is not working. But that the critique is to the system, that the critique is to the social mandate or to your specific mandates, I don't see it that way. You have your constituencies, you have your counterparts, you have your own spaces. ILO has a tripartism that has celebrated 100 years, so we must be doing something well to last for that long. So what if we decide or we think that the reaction out there vis-a-vis the agenda that we're talking about is not so negative? I have to finish. Yeah, is not so negative. I just want to put that in the picture, because if we arrive at the conclusion that it is not that negative, well, it sort of changes a bit the optic, and you will look at it in a different way. And let me just finish, because there was something I want to make sure that I said at the end, and I got going with other issues. I'm sorry. Yes, it's three things. The social summit mandated to reinforce the achievement of the SDGs inevitably needs to think and agree on policies well beyond 2030. I won't go beyond that. But I mean, if we're meeting in 2025 and the whole thing ends 5 years later, we're not talking about those 5 years. We're talking about what comes afterwards. So that will have to be, basic. This is a meeting. It's the first meeting that we will begin thinking about what is the post-2030 agenda. The second, I mentioned it en passant, the summit has to be seen. And here I'm not referring, of course, to media campaign, but what would happen is if each one of your organizations simply offers itself in your mandate to talk to your counterparts and to say, look, this is what's going on. We would like to know what you're thinking about it. We will have to put this together, but we're interested in your opinion. And if we put together simply the knowledge that comes out of that consultation of your own bodies, there's an enormous amount of knowledge that comes out of that. I would mention that it's important. And there are things that we're doing that I think are important, and I will leave it there. For example, the ILO has launched a successful multi-stakeholder global coalition for social justice, whose contribution to the summit is clearly relevant. The last UNDP Human Development Report, there's no doubt about it. The Group of Madrid, in which I'm a mentor, has been pushing from the non-governmental side, but the political non-governmental side, very much this. you have just written an article on the great transformations. And let me finish with the following. I said that all these things were very difficult, and the struggle for social justice is an uphill battle. What I simply want to say, and end with this, is that that is normal. There's nothing odd about it. It's normal. And the moment we assume normality of obstacles, you know, we use sort of energy, you know, because what's new about it? You know, there's nothing new. You know, it's the same people or the same interests, etc., etc., etc. And if you're able to have that perspective that it's normal, then you're strengthened in your capacity to insist, your capacity to wait, and your capacity to do things. And the only conclusion is, and here really end, the only conclusion is, don't get depressed. Don't get depressed. You know? Yeah. And secondly, don't lose faith in dialogue. Don't get depressed, don't get faith in dialogue, and we continue pushing. So thank you again very, very much for being here. I have to mention, sorry, because I didn't do it at the beginning, President Bachelet, for being here, and thanking you so much for Jose Miguel Insulza, who left, for the Minister of Social Development, Javier Toro. And I have to say that I have behind me some of the young persons in the diplomacy of Chile who are now ambassadors, who participated in the preparation of the first social summit. Pedro Ollarse, Cristian Maqueira, Fernando Reyes at the beginning of the whole process, all ambassadors now, and I'm very happy. And I'm very happy. Huh? Puro Lolo. And they're all around.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very, very much, Mr. Somavia, for thoughts, and more than thoughts, your indication of way forward that I'm sure is going to be taken into account. Now I'd like to, we have the intervention of Mr. Tedros, who has sent us a video, the Director General of the World Health Organization. Can we put the video, please?
Colleagues and friends, COVID-19 demonstrated that when health is at risk, everything is at risk. The pandemic not only stole lives and livelihoods, it also disrupted societies, businesses, economies, and even caused political instability. Resilient health systems based on strong primary health care are a vital defense against epidemics and pandemics, and the foundation of universal health coverage. But they are also the foundation of social and economic stability and development. However, some of the best investments in health are those made outside the health sector, in addressing the drivers of disease in the air people breathe, the food they eat, the water they drink, the products they consume, and the conditions in which they live and work. Health is therefore not just the business of the health sector, it's the business of every sector: education, energy, environment, finance, trade, transport, and more. The Second World Summit for Social Development in 2025 will be an important opportunity to assess progress, share what works, and focus on accelerating towards the SDGs. As ever, WHO remains committed to supporting our member states in every way possible to build a healthier, safer, fairer future in Latin America, the Caribbean, and everywhere. I thank you.
Now it's my turn, and it's really, I'm delighted to intervene today on behalf of the 5 regional commissions. of the United Nations, we would like to start by expressing our enthusiasm and full support across the 5 regions regarding the decision of member states to convene the second World Summit for Social Development. It has been nearly 30 years since the first World Summit was held in Copenhagen in March 1995. Ever since, the regional commissions have played a crucial role in implementing measures and mechanisms to monitor and implement the commitments agreed upon at the summit and reporting them to the Economic and Social Council in line with our mandate. Given our convening power and proximity to member states, the regional commissions serve as inclusive intergovernmental platforms for deliberating and adapting universal norms and global frameworks to regional and country contexts. Moreover, we build dynamic and effective nexuses between the global, regional, and national levels. This gains more significance in the face of a challenging new global context, which includes heightened geopolitical tensions, rising economic fragmentation, intensifying impacts of climate change, demographic shifts, technological disruption, the threat of pandemics, war and conflict, and an international financial architecture that no longer responds adequately to the development finance needs. Over the past decades, important progress has been made towards eradicating poverty, reducing multidimensional inequalities, promoting full employment and social inclusion. However, multiple and overlapping crises imply that even larger efforts are needed, as well as some rethinking of traditional thinking and or implementing public policies to achieve inclusive social development. It is time to address the current development crisis and to recalibrate the multilateral development system by putting people at the center, which is why we celebrate that member states have decided to convene the second World Summit on Social Development. We would like to highlight 3 main themes through which the regional commissions can contribute to rethinking social development. First, we need to pursue inclusive social development as a precondition for achieving sustainable development. As regional commissions, we are committed to supporting member states in this effort. Efforts in this direction include policies to eradicate poverty, create productive employment and decent jobs, and expand social protection. All of these elements are contained in the 2030 Agenda. It is difficult, if not impossible, to achieve these goals if economies do not grow at minimum rates, to have dynamic labor markets, and generate the fiscal resources to finance these efforts. Inclusive social development may be understood as the capacity of states to ensure the full exercise of people's social, economic, and cultural rights, targeting gaps in access to key areas of well-being and addressing social inequalities. We reaffirm Copenhagen's statement that, and I quote, economic development, social development, and environmental protection are interdependent and mutually reinforcing components of sustainable development, which is the framework for our efforts to achieve higher quality of life for all people. Moreover, inclusive and gender-responsive social development is strategic for overcoming current crises and for building resilience against future shocks. Secondly, we need to address the mounting inequalities that characterize the world today and implement policies that not only address them, but also increase social mobility and social cohesion. Inequality is contrary to basic concepts of social justice, is inefficient for growth, and corrosive for social cohesion and the stability of social contracts. There are multiple factors that explain inequality across the world, such as sectoral differences in productivity, as well as the predominance of micro and small companies with very low productivity, many of them contributing and constituting the bulk of very large informal sectors. The unequal distribution of income is rooted in these structural differences in productivity and therefore incomes. To this, we can add factors such as the weaknesses of education systems and gaps in the access to social services, all of which risk further deepening in the context of digital divides between and within countries. Gender inequality and discrimination and violations of human rights suffered by certain population groups are also significant factors. Moreover, climate change and environmental degradation have the strongest impacts on the most vulnerable and increasingly become drivers of inequality. In the face of these challenges, the actions we can take to reduce inequality and pursue more inclusive social development include working with an integrated approach on all these drivers of inequality, that is, strengthening productive development policies to increase growth, create more formal jobs, and make growth more inclusive and sustainable, expanding social protection and the welfare states, effective education for all and broad access to vocational training, progress towards gender equality and the care society, digital transformation, and safe, orderly, and regular migration. Such actions, along with addressing economic and environmental dimensions of development, can contribute to a more productive, inclusive, and sustainable future, but also require strengthening institutional governance and social dialogue capacities. Third, we need to secure broad support to strengthen universal, inclusive, sustainable, and resilient social protection systems. These are the key pillars of a welfare state that our world urgently requires, as the recent impacts of the pandemic have shown. Promoting social dialogues to strengthen social cohesion and advancing with social fiscal compacts are essential for expanding social protection systems and for ensuring their financial sustainability, as well as for creating effective welfare states that support sustainable social and economic development. Finally, international collaboration is crucial to address new sources of social risk, including climate change, in a context of indisputable global interdependency between countries and regions. The value of public and common goods, including social protection, is as important as ever. However, geopolitical tensions hinder the required collaboration. In this scenario, the support of the United Nations Regional Commissions takes a central role in facilitating dialogue and consensus. The United Nations Regional Commissions stand ready to collaborate and support all efforts needed to strengthen international cooperation and multilateralism and work with national governments to achieve our common objectives of sustainable development. The Second World Summit for Social Development can build on the outcomes of the Summit of the Future, including with regards to the fundamental issue of development financing. Poverty and inequality remain key obstacles for achieving inclusive social development, where collective well-being, human dignity, solidarity, and rights are at the core of the development agenda for a new era. That's the statement that we agreed to make with the regional commissions. And given that my colleague from the regional commission from the Arab countries is here, I'd like to offer you, Rola, the opportunity, of course, to complement these words on this statement.
Thank you. I think what we heard today is extremely important on the issues of social development issues. Our region is in the region shares similar issues that is confronted with Latin America in terms of inequality. We have one of the highest inequality in the region. We have around 184 million people left behind, where we're talking about no one leaving behind as a part of the Agenda 2030. We do share also on issues of poverty in the region with Latin America. There is a lot of similarities which we have between Arab region and Latin America on challenges on social development, and South-South cooperation between us is extremely important. We're learning from good success stories on social policies that has been impactful, and in terms of social protection systems that has been successful policies in Latin American countries that we can share it with our countries also in the region to move forward. It's an important topic. We stand ready to collaborate also as a regional commissions collectively to advance the status of social development in the world. Thank you.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Rola, muchísimas gracias. Y dada la presencia de la señora Presidente y, por supuesto, toda su historia también con Naciones Unidas, queríamos ofrecerle la palabra para espontáneamente algún comentario que le parezca sobre la cumbre y lo que se ha dicho. Señora Presidente.
Thank you very much. It's very spontaneous and voluntary what you made me do, but it's okay. Spontaneous, at least, is true. Well, I think it has been for me very interesting to listen to all the presentations, because my impression is, having been so many times in meetings at the UN and outside the UN with member states, sometimes you tend to listen to the same things. Sorry to be so open and honest. And I think that all of you have tried to do something different, to try to identify exactly the different context from when it was possible, the Summit of Cope, and now that the main word that will happen if you ask the normal citizen of the world will say lack of hope. And we need that hope. We need that hope because the world needs to improve people's life and people's condition. And I think, as you said, Juan, I truly believe, I haven't made any research about it, but my impression is that in terms of social dimensions, there's much more agreement than in terms of peace and security and all the conflicts that we're seeing today. I think that every one of you have done a very interesting process to identify what's new, what's different, but also the obstacles and what can be the solutions. We don't have all the answers here. We do have certain hints, if I would say, on which could be the way we go forward to be able to identify which are those solutions and which we can identify some. The problem is, and I was in Princeton last week, and there was people from Latin America and from the IDB and so on, and they were saying, look, for example, Latin America has so many possibilities. Why it doesn't happen? What are we lacking on some things? I mean, we all know the problems, and Juan Manuel has mentioned very clearly all the obstacles and all the lacking issues that we have in the region. So I think it's really important this high-level summit could find ways and solutions not to provide the answers that are there but have not worked. So how we can make it so it really works? My impression is that maybe what you are proposing, Juan, because I'm totally spontaneous, I haven't thought much about it, could make a difference, but it's not easy. I don't believe that it will be easy for the resident coordinator's office do all that, if you wanted to do a really, really national level, to have all that possibility of making it the other way around, from grassroots, if I may say, organization, from peoples to the highest level. But I think it's an interesting exercise that should be done, to see if that can change a little bit the dynamics. And but I don't think it's easy. I think it's very complicated because we tried to do it in the past with the MDGs, and I mean, once I was with the SDGs, symbol, and in a plane, somebody asked me, "Are you from the diversity?" Because of course they didn't know that was the symbol of the SDG because they have no idea what the SDGs were about. So it is a very difficult and complex, and I think, but we need to think much more on how we solve it. But I think, to be honest, I have enjoyed this panel because all of you have mentioned different aspects that are really interesting. And I think we need to think out of the box. We need to think a little bit, what else can we do? And of course, we all need, and I'm saying this as a citizen of the world, to work together so we can have a very successful summit. I think the world is really complicated today, but the world also needs a positive result on this, because I think that could bring real hope to the people, and that maybe could bring countries of the world to be able to put together what unites all, and to put to a second phase, if I say, what divides us. And maybe we can advance, and that could be a real important for the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam President, for your thoughts, all more valuable, because you were not expecting to address us, and evidently you have a profound understanding of the UN system, of the challenges, social challenges in the world. We have agreed here at the head table to change the program in light of the time and the hour. And so we are going to skip the 2-minute interaction that we had planned, and with your permission and the permission of the Deputy Secretary General, and we have agreed with the co-chair we would like to invite Deputy Secretary General to give some final remarks and thoughts.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try not to be another speech, but the reason why we are always so appreciative of Michelle Bachelet's spontaneity is because she just says it as it is. And I think it captures what most of us are thinking, but we don't often get the opportunity to say. I think what she has done in that last few minutes has given us a good sense of how complex this is going to be when we get to the World Social Summit. And if we are truly going to talk about the how we get things done, because I think that's the question everyone is asking these days, particularly of the United Nations. I think your point, Michelle, on divided, less united, less for solidarity, so true. I think we've probably always been divided on those issues. It's just now it got louder. I've never seen it be so loud, and that's different. Before, people managed it and tried to hope that we would get over it, but we haven't been able to do that. This has been a really very helpful discussion. I sort of had 4 or 5 points that came to mind, and one of them really was that it was actually ACIM 1990 when we first talked about the Sustainable Development Agenda. It was very green, so it was well before this. What happened is it never came of time because of those tensions, and most of those tensions, I think, created by work we already had, and we didn't want to do it differently. I still think the Sustainable Development Agenda, born in Rio, has, while it came of its time and we have 17 goals, we have not yet embraced it conceptually. If we had, we still wouldn't have the problem of coming together on these issues and working together on these issues, and perhaps even our supporters, donors, partners, seeing that differently. So for sure, there is nothing that is not in this SDG framework that we need in addition or anything new for 2025. Perhaps it's a question of deepening that aspect of it and really speaking to how do we get it without siloing it and making it a grant-making machine, because the social agenda is much more than that. And you talk to 10 goals, and perhaps others would say 6, and have the debate. What is a sustainable development agenda with people at the center, which is what Copenhagen did, and to make sure that we understand all the other pieces that come together. I often say, when people say, what's your favorite goal? It's like asking someone, who's the favorite member of your family. It's just impossible, right? But we always go to goal 5 because we say that all the other goals can dock with goal 5, and goal 5 can respond to all. And I think that on the social agenda, it's very important that we have that discussion, because I'm afraid that we may spend another 7 years with the social agenda for first owning it, and owning it through the 3 issues that you said. Does the UN system embrace it in its totality? And it's not just the development system, it's also the political side of the house, the humanitarian side of the house, the rights side of the house. Society, when do we have that discussion with society? And assuming that the challenges we have for how far back we are on education, on everyone understanding their environment, the discussion with society will be at different levels. There will not be any cookie cutter of RCs going out to have an engagement. It's much more complex than that. Each country will be different. In fact, within countries, it will be different. And then the member states, if we have learned anything over the last few years, from COVID to Ukraine to Palestine, is that we have in all our, I would say, halls of the UN, whether it is New York or Geneva, Vienna, Paris, in all of those, there's more of a distance with the permanent representatives of the ministries of foreign affairs who come there embracing and holding on to the charter, and the governments back in capital. There is such a chasm now in many. And so how you try to respond to the charter with a leadership that is so far away from it, with a country that, quite rightly, Michelle says some don't know what this round badge is. In fact, I think in the Gulf region, they don't wear it because they see it synonymous with our LGBTQI community. So we have to do more to socialize it, and we have to do more to get to that summit with a sense of ownership on it. On the third that I heard coming from all of you, the whole trust piece, And I mean, a lot of the trust is that we made promises and we're not keeping them. But we keep them, we're not keeping them for those that need them most. We're keeping promises for those who need them least. And so there's a sense of injustice, there's a sense of double standards, and I think that the Social Summit could help us, and the Summit of the Future, could help us to build some confidence-building measures to bring back that trust. But it won't come without everyone feeling that they're an equal member of the family when it comes to collective response on the challenges that we have. And consensus should mean solidarity. But I think solidarity means different things in different parts of the world. And we need to come back and reinforce that just as we do when we talk to the Charter and we the people. So if we're to get to people-centered, that will be important. There's some new things that have come about, and I know that on the feminist agenda, I've been one of those that have pushed back against some way of framing what is important, because I see that this is so different from one part of the world to another. And let me put one of those issues here because it was spoken about, and that is the care economy. When the care economy first came up for discussion, I was allergic to those two words. I really felt like they were trying to monetize everything that I hold. And so I was struggling to find a way to say, this is not about you, Amina Mohammed. This is about, the world as it is, and the care economy is important, and this is what we're going to go with. But I then asked UN Women, can we have a discussion on this? Because I really just don't think it's about just me. I think people think like this, that it is a problem. And I was, it was probably a huge relief when, in fact, we saw this birthing of the Care Society, because that, to me, then spoke to women who are in a society, in a community, in a way in which they should be responding to an issue and not just talking about the economy. But the economy, a big part of it, but how do you thread that within what we all respond to in the different responsibilities that we have and aspirations that we have all the way through. So that is new, and I think that we should really think about that because it is core to what we do in society. At least half of it is us. I also heard here a tension between really the context within which we are living and the ambitions we have. So should the ambition have a reality check? Should we be realistic about our ambition? Or should the ambition be the aspiration? And that what you do is you try to get that ambition, and when you get to the point that you have made the commitment, you don't make it, then you get up again and you live to fight another day. People are often asking me, don't you think we're not going to get the 2030 agenda? The 17 goals are not going to work by 2030. We've done the math, we're scientists, and the data shows it's not going to happen. And so I'm asking, so which person are you going to tell that is going hungry every night that there is no hope for 2030? You have to keep that hope alive. And you don't know whether that person, in fact, will be one that makes it, another doesn't. But if the UN starts failing before it gets there, then at least the narrative is failure before you get there. Then I think we've lost on the commodity we call hope that we say we give to the world or share with the world. So I think it's very important that the context is always horrendous. The context is always difficult for many of us. But the ambition is the aspirations. And there's a gap, and some places smaller, some places larger, but our job is to try to close it and to do it as best that we can. So let's not hope that the context is going to reduce the ambition because we want to be realistic about what is doable. And that's important when you're speaking both to an international context and the national level. I want to end just with the one question I didn't hear us bring up. And it's central, and maybe we didn't bring it up because we think it's assumed, and should we? And that was the question of human rights. Because there are very different lenses to human rights today. And that is a challenge to us, and we saw that we gained much from the discussion and that people embrace it and really want that benchmark there that we have in Geneva, but there are many questions to it. And I'm just wondering how in the World Social Summit, which is the nearest probably to people's rights, that they feel they touch, that we will address this. And if it's not missing and we've assumed it, then we must articulate it in its job as an outcome in people's lives. Thank you so much for sharing this day with me. Thank you.
Well, I think we all should be very, very pleased by the conversation we just had. Our objective of providing a vision around central challenges that need to be addressed in the Second World Summit for Social Development has been achieved. As we have heard, a range of characterizations around at least 3 areas. First, evaluating progress since the Copenhagen Summit, and very, very interesting thoughts about how the world has changed, how the challenges have changed, and how we have to think hard about the solutions moving forward. Secondly, current and emerging challenges and how to address them. And third, suggestions as to future courses of action, including on how to strengthen the progress in the social dimensions of Agenda 2030. Only to give many thanks, particularly on starting with Amina Mohammed, UN Deputy Secretary General. It was an honor to have you with us this afternoon and listen to your inspiring words and thoughts. Many thanks to Gilbert Hombo, Director General of the ILO, for all the collaboration, the organization of this event. Many thanks to Ambassador Pablo Narvaez. We again celebrate your efforts to make 2025 World Summit for Social Development a reality. Thank you very much, Mr. Juan Somavia, for your thoughts on how to strengthen the social mandate of the UN and the work of the UN system on social issues, and indeed for helping us in the organization of this event as well. Thank you very, very much, Madam President Michelle Bachelet, for your presence and also for sharing your thoughts. Thank you to all my colleagues, Lee Jun-hua, Akim Steiner, Sima Bahous, Ku Dong-yu, and Tedros Ghebreyesus. It has been a privilege to have you all together in this privileged room at ECLAC. Thank you very much to all the online guests that have been with us, connected and listening. And your interventions and ideas are proof of the great value that the UN system has to offer and is offering and providing to member states to build a more productive, inclusive, and sustainable world. Thank you very much.
Well done, thank yourself. Teamwork, we did well.
It was great, yeah.
It was very good. Thank you very much.